Welcome to Status Secure, the weekly cyber threat briefing for executives who refuse to operate in the blind. Hosted by the Watcher 6 Collective, uniting former Army Special Forces and Naval Special Warfare Communications operators, alongside an industry-leading CISO nominated for Cybersecurity Woman of the World. We cut through the noise and give you the operational intelligence you need for mission success in a hostile digital environment. The enemy is listening. Is your status secure? Welcome back to Status Secure. This is part 2 of the CMMC briefing. Last week we built the foundation. Today we deliver the information for Phase 2. So November 10th, 2026 is the date. That is the date the DoD ends the self-attestation era for most Level 2 contractors. From that date forward, if your contract involves controlled unclassified information, otherwise known as CUI, and you do not have an active C3PAO certification on file, you are not eligible to bid. You are not eligible to win, and you are not eligible to receive option exercise on contracts you already hold. The math from here is brutal. 80,000 contractors in the defense industrial base need Level 2 certification. Fewer than 800 certified assessors exist in the country. So the DoD's own modeling says we need between 2,000 to 3,000 assessors to clear the queue. The contractors who waited until summer to start engaging C3PAOs are already booking into 2027. So, CISO, lay out the actual deadline reality for us.
Sure. I mean, it's a math problem, right? You already talked about that, right? It's like a bottleneck. I mean, you mentioned 80,000 contractors, fewer than 800 assessors. I mean, do the math, right? And then the reality, like sometimes they say 2 to 6 weeks, right, is how long it takes. And we know, like reality, really 2 to 6 weeks for an assessor. It takes a lot. Sometimes it takes a lot longer, especially if the assessor has questions, if you are, trying to gather your evidence during the audit and not beforehand. Even if the assessor worked full time, day and night on your certification, right? The math doesn't work out. Right? The bottleneck is just a structural thing. It's a numbers thing. It's not going to be solved by November, right? And so, what does that bottleneck look like when you take a deeper dive? Those C3PAOs, in like the really big defense contractor corridors, Northern Virginia, right by DC, Southern California, Boston, the Boston Defense Belt, Florida, Space Coast, they're scheduling their certification exams of assessors who already into late 2026, right? Into Q1 of 2027. If you talk to a C3PAO right now, they're going to tell you, like, they're booking months, if you're lucky now, right? Because this has been out for a while. And contractors with complex environments and multi-site operations, large subcontractor networks, significant CUI repositories. You're going to need longer engagements. And so they know, so they've been booking earlier. I mean, it's not uncommon to have already a C3PAO booked like all the way into Q1 of 2027, which means that if you haven't done it and you're looking for a C3PAO right now, right? What does that mean for you? It means that you're not getting assessed until Q2 of 2027, right? And so if you do that, it's late. It's after, if you start after the deadline, you're getting a question about why you waited, right? Like they're going to wonder, like, you knew this was coming. Why did you wait so long? So, and then, let's be real, right? This enforcement is not soft enforcement. The DoD signaled this like through the FAQs, the CIO guidance, their rulemaking, right? Their contracting officers, right? They've been notifying everyone of the Level 2 certification requirements, right? And so I don't know about you, but I've never known the DoD to say, that's okay, you didn't get it, that we'll just let you slide this time. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. They have a big enough pool, or they're not worried about the people who weren't paying attention and kind of didn't get on this right away. As long as they have their options to pull from, they don't care. So yeah, let's get specific. November 10th, 2026, what changes? What changes contractually? What changes operationally? Walk us through like an executive at a company who needs this. This is it's just part of their game plan to do business. So what should they expect?
Well, first, new solicitations, contracting officers across the DoD will begin including mandatory level 2 C3PAO certification requirements on new solicitations, right, involving CUI. The bid response will require the contractor to provide their current CMMC certification status. And if you don't have it or without a credible C3PAO engagement letter and remediation timeline, those bids are going to be, you're going to be not allowed to bid on them. So those contracting officers are going to just be non-responsive. That's going to be their first question. Do you have CMMC certification? If you come back and say no, or that, you don't have, an actual letter, that's the other thing. You're going to have to get your C3PAO, engagement letter, an executed signed letter, right? To be able to say, no, we don't, but here's the letter, here's the timeline for our assessment. Otherwise, those contracting officers won't talk to you. Contractual change, right? Existing contracts with CUI exposure that contain CMMC relevant clauses will be reviewed, at option exercise. So what does that mean, right? And that means that if your current contract ends, but there was a, clause that allowed an extension, like for them to extend that contract, they're going to review it and they're going to see, like, does that include CUI? And if it does, they're not going to give you that extension unless you have your CMMC certification, right? So they're not going to exercise that option to extend your current contract. You're going to lose that contract. The performance risk system, right? Your supplier performance risk system score, that SPRS, is going to be very important. It's, the primes use them as the first pass filter on supplier evaluation, right? So they're going to look. So a low SPRS score combined with no C3PAO engagement letter signal that the supplier is at risk of becoming non-responsive, right? So, if you're a sub, the primes are going to be looking at that. They're going to look at your score. They're going to look to see if you have, your CMMC certification or an executed engagement letter, right? Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop, all of those, right? Those really big primes that a lot of subs love to work for, right? They're not waiting until November. They're already requiring CMMC documentation because they want to be ahead of that timeline, right? They don't want to wait until November to find out that their subs don't have CMMC certification, right? So think of it that way. If the DoD requires it in November, then all of the primes are going to want it before then. The C3PAO can issue conditional level 2 certifications when a contractor passes the assessment with minor gaps and an accepted POEM. The condition is a bridge, not a destination. It kind of gives you, that bridge to finish, but you got to finish and get your certification.
Got it. And let's say we're a small shop, right? We're a contractor who we're hearing this and we're going, you know what? We're good. I think we're just not going to bid on DoD work anymore. We're just going to pivot, stay commercial, stay in the private sector or what have you. Is that, a viable exit strategy for them?
Well, let's walk through it, right? Like, so if you're a small supplier and you're like, getting CMMC certification is too much for us, let's just, not do it. And let's just focus on our private, right? Our non-DoD contracts, So if the defense revenue is a single digit percentage, because you have to take a look, like how much of it is part of your revenue stream, right? If it's small, then maybe, you rationalize, okay, you can justify that the certification investment is too big, and you rationalize that, okay, it's from a financial standpoint, the better decision is to just not bid on DoD contracts anymore or to sub for them, right? So for contractors with material, exposure, say 20% or more of revenue from defense work, direct or through primes, pivoting out is not actually a pivot. It is a contraction. The replacement commercial revenue takes 18 to 36 months to build. So the CMMC certification path is 6 to 12 months. So again, it's just a math, right? If you decide not to do it and you want to replace your DoD, contract revenue, it's going to take you more than a year, right? More than a year to like 2 years and beyond to replace that income when you could have just gotten your CMMC certification. Right? Small subs who serve primes often think they can escape CMMC by simply telling the prime they do not touch CUI. The increasingly, the prime won't take this at just trust me, right? I don't, I'm going to be your sub. I'm not touching any CUI. They'll require an attestation, right? Often from the C3PAO, to verify that, yeah, this sub does not, that is not, and is exempt from that requirement. They're not just going to take your word for it. So no matter what, you still have to have a C3PAO take a look at your environment. And so why not just get the certification?
Yeah, and that kind of segues into something we talked about back in episode 15, where we discussed inheriting control drift. Basically, new leadership coming in and maybe not realizing that their controls are outdated and they haven't really been looked at. And so in how it relates here, so with phase 2, how it makes affirmation a different kind of a situation. Walk us through what changes for these senior officials who have to come in and sign it after November 10.
Well, before, the senior official in phase 1, the senior official, attested that the contractor was performing the controls they reported to SPRS, right? A self-assessed score, a self-attested affirmation. The verification mechanism was after the fact audits, or a breach. Okay. Phase 2 is that under phase 2, the senior official affirmation is sitting on top of a C3PAO verified certification. So on top of an independent review, right, assessment. This makes the certification real. The verification is real, right? It's not just a sign off on compliance, right? Just a check, but an actual, not just a check of compliance, but also a verification that they're compliant. The affirmation now and attestation that the contractor is operating the controls, right? And that any drift since certification has been remediated. This ties back to the False Claims Act, right, that we did in episodes 7 and 15. The Department of Justice's Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative has been explicit. False or inaccurate affirmation to the government, particularly affirmations tied to certification programs, are triggers for False Claim Act enforcement. Right? As a reminder, the whistleblower shares 15 to 30% of any settlement, and the whistleblower is most likely an internal compliance lead or department IT, employee. And then the personal exposure to the senior official. The affirmation carries the senior official's name. There's a federal class action complaint in similar fact patterns. Like look at what happened to Marriott Starwood. We talked about Power School and Bain Capital. So now that senior official, the CEO are named, who usually signs the CMMC affirmation against a control library that was drifted since certification is exposed personally. This is the operational reality that we talked about in episode 15. The senior official is personally liable and can be named in lawsuits.
Yeah, that's that one hits hard, right? So if we're listening to this.
Yeah, if you're a senior official, if you're the CEO of a company, if you're the one signing because every certification requires a signature. And if you're the one signing, your name, your reputation, your money is on the line.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, we have 5.5 months until phase 2 in November of 2026. What would you say are the 3 things that someone listening who kind of fits into this segment, right, who's in the CMMC, serves the DoD, needs phase 2, what are things that they can execute over the next 30, 60, 90 days so that they're ready for this?
Yeah, within the next 30 days, just book the C3PAO engagement. Find one and just, get an engagement letter signed saying that you're going to be performing an assessment to get your certification. In the next 60 days, do a readiness gap assessment, whether you hire somebody to do it or you do it internally, right? Against the 110 NIST, 171 controls and the 320 assessment objectives. The output is a written report identifying every gap, the remediation cost, the remediation timeline, and the named owner. Every gap that surfaces in the readiness assessment is a gap that does not surface in the C3PAO assessment. That's the entire point, right, of running it, because then you can put it on a poem, right, and get, your conditional certification if needed. And then, allow those certification, like those assessment report to be real. I mean, I've sat in, enough meetings where people argue, no, this is not a gap. This is not a gap. This is not, right? Like they just argue because they don't want to say their baby is ugly. It's okay. It's okay if your baby is ugly. They might outgrow that, with your help. Okay. So, that's important, is to want to find those gaps, right? And then next is to, remediate those, right? In the next 90 days, whatever is found in your, your gap assessment, just remediate them. So that way, and you'll have a chance now to like actually prioritize them, sequence your gap closure by impact and complexity, right? The high impact, the low complexity, go at them first, right? Do short-term remediation and have a long-term remediation plan, because you can fill those gaps like with something, a Band-Aid, right, while you are planning out the longer-term remediation. So it's usually like logging your architecture, access controls, and incident response. Those are the ones that benefit from the full 90 days, because you can remediate those pretty quickly. Okay. So the contractor who closes the gaps in real time before the assessor walks in are the contractors who get clean level 2 certifications. And the contractors who try to close gaps during the assessment are the contractors who end up with like conditional certifications, right? So you don't want to try and do that while you're getting your CMMC certification. Basically, do it beforehand.
Got it. So the phase 2 deadline, it's not negotiable, right? The C3PAO assessor capacity is not really increasing that fast, not for the demand anyways. And the contractors who are ready will continue winning defense contracts. So the contractors who are not will be quietly removed from prime supplier lists and will fail bid evaluations and will lose option exercises on contracts they currently hold. So November 10th, 2026, the clock is running, 5.5 months away. The runway is shorter than it appears, and mission success is about understanding the timeline you're actually operating against, not the timeline you wish you had at this point. So trust, but verify your own posture. Book the C3PAO, run the sprint, find the gaps, remediate the gaps, and execute to the standard. And with that, you know everything you need to know about phase 2. The rest is on you. So we'll see you next week. Mission success isn't about luck. It's about preparation. You've heard the intel. Now, go put it to use. If you need to verify your security posture, I've established a secure line at watcher6.com/secure. Go there to get the briefing the enemy doesn't want you to have. We'll see you next week. Until then, keep your head on a swivel.